Hey there, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Stephen Donziger, human rights attorney, has a lot of familiarity with corporations that environmentally contaminate huge populations. Won $9.5 billion settlement with Chevron, and as a result became a basically political prisoner because of Chevron. So I thought it would be good to catch up with you on what's going on in East Palestine, Ohio. Unfortunately, after a lot of media coverage initially, it's kind of fallen out of the news cycle a little bit. But I wanted to get your thoughts because seems like a eerily similar situation to Flint and many other things I've covered, where the residents are experiencing X, Y, and Z, but they're being told by the government, and in this case, the corporations, everything's fine.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations, Jordan, to you and your team. You guys have done some excellent reporting from the site of this disaster. I mean, first of all, when I sort of look at what's happening in East Palestine, I see Love Canal, I see Chevron's disaster in Ecuador, and I see the same corporate playbook by Norfolk Southern Rail Company that you see in other instances of mass industrial poisoning that have taken place in this country. And what happens is a company has an accident, largely in this case because of a failure to invest money in proper braking technologies and putting sensors on the track so this derailment could have been prevented. This was not an accident, by the way. Incident is what I would call it. And when it happens, they then, try to get through it by managing it as a public relations challenge as opposed to the public health catastrophe that it is. And, we have a government for a reason. Governments should protect the public from corporate malfeasance, from corporate abuse, from the fallout of mass industrial disasters like the one in Ohio. And unfortunately, because of the slow and steady degradation of governmental functions by the power of corporations, by lobbying, over recent decades, our government has completely failed to protect the people affected by this disaster in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and frankly, other states, where this mushroom cloud of poison created by the company has spread. So, right now, I think back to the Deepwater Horizon spill in 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico, massive oil spill, accident. Okay. President Obama at the time really went after BP, and within days, the company voluntarily put up a $20 billion fund to compensate victims. In this instance, our government is now much weaker. President Biden has said virtually nothing. He has not visited the site, which is shocking to me. And Norfolk Southern has done almost nothing. I mean, they put up initially a few $1,000s, then like $2 million. Now I think yesterday the CEO said it's up to $20 million. $20 million. I mean, that might be enough to compensate 3 families for someone dying. Okay, that is nothing. That is pennies. Compare that to BP putting up $20 billion. And by the way, I put this at the doorstep of President Biden. By being silent, by not visiting, by not going after Alan Shaw, the CEO of Norfolk Southern, who's largely the person responsible for this disaster. He has let Norfolk Southern off the hook. And the people paying the price are the people affected, not just East Palestine, but other communities in the area. And the EPA, are the one governmental agency that's designated with the mission of protecting the public, has completely fallen down and seems to be running cover for the rail company as opposed to actually caring about the public health catastrophe that is affecting the public. So all in all, it's the same old playbook. Publicity at the beginning, a little bit of PR, put up the smallest amount of money that you can, sort of put it off on the EPA, which is completely ill-equipped to deal with it. And ultimately, the people pay the price in terms of some sort of shoddy cleanup ongoing public health problems, neurological damage, cancers, um, premature deaths, that kind of thing that's going to be happening. And I believe, just looking at this, for decades to come.
And you mentioned 20 million. That is in contrast to the 18 billion in stock buybacks and dividends that Norfolk Southern
Yeah.
gave back last year. I wanted to ask you, common sense perspective. You don't need to be a lawyer, a chemist. I feel if this happened in a little wealthier area, they would have not been so quick to bring people back. They might have kept people evacuated while they're doing testing, not sent people back into town while they're doing testing. We have residents telling us that their homes smell like gas stations, formaldehyde. They have soot all over their home. If you turn off the fan, instantly you smell things, yet they're being told the testing is showing it's safe. Residents have acute health issues, dizziness, nausea, nosebleeds, chemical rashes. Would you say the government is supposed to protect people? For the amount of money we're spending around the world, couldn't the government put forth some money to temporarily relocate whoever feels they need to be relocated?
Absolutely. But, I would, yes. I mean, this is going to cost billions and billions of dollars. Think back to the Deepwater Horizon spill. BP ended up paying on the order of $75 billion for the long-term health impacts, damages to business as a result of that spill. Okay. Norfolk Southern is a $55 billion company, profits several billion a year. They've spent tens of billions on stock buybacks. What I would do if I were president of the United States is try to figure out a way to at least temporarily nationalize the company, take it over, just like under the Obama administration, the government took over GM to save it from itself, and put it into receivership and have the government run the company and take out assets as needed and profits to both invest in safety operations and to compensate the victims of not only this disaster but other derailments that this company has caused over the last several years. So I would not, what we've seen now is a weak government response. I mean, basically the EPA, the Department of Transportation, Michael Regan at the EPA, Pete Buttigieg at the DOT, President Biden, they're like sending letters, like kind of begging the company to pay for the cleanup. But it doesn't make any sense. I mean, bring the hammer down, make the company pay billions of dollars in order to continue operating. It is the only way to deal with this problem. Yes, the government should order an evacuation. Yes, the people affected need to be compensated. Yes, the government should take the lead and do it. But the entity that should pay for it is the company, and that has to be forced on it by the government. I mean, the idea that Alan Shaw, the CEO, was testifying before Congress yesterday without any investigation. I mean, there needs to be a criminal probe of this. I mean, this was not an accident. I've argued that this is actually a corporate crime. Why? Because with intention, the company failed to invest money into proper safety equipment after it had been warned for years by its own workers, warned for years by experts. And as a result, this inevitable accident occurred, and we're seeing the same old playbook where the company is basically putting the cost, the bill for the cleanup onto taxpayers. Because whatever little paltry money the government has put up, Chevron, by the way, did this in Ecuador and is still doing it. Whatever small amount of money for their completely ridiculous phantom remediation that they are paying, it is pennies on the dollar, first of all, and it is not enough.
Yep.
So the idea that this guy can go to Congress and just sort of be treated like just a corporate CEO with a little bit of a problem is outrageous. He needs to be subject to a criminal probe, possible criminal prosecution, along with other managers who are responsible for these stock buybacks while not investing in safety. And I'll also point out, not to get too far afield here, but why the hell are 41 peaceful protesters climate activists in Atlanta protesting this Cop City police training complex, charged with domestic terrorism, facing 35-year sentences. Most of them did not commit a crime. At worst, some committed a property crime. They're facing terrorism charges, and this guy made decisions that poisoned millions of people, and he's treated like a respectable CEO. I mean, our justice system is failing. It has become an instrument of corporate power rather than a check on corporate abuse. It's a real problem.
And you see, connected with both of these stories in East Palestine and now in Atlanta with Cop City, journalists either being arrested or interrogated by police. This happened a couple days ago for the week of action in Cop City, that journalists were being stopped by police. What are you here to cover? As if it's not obvious what they're there to cover. Police actually earlier today pulled over an independent journalist who's been covering Cop City. And we know in East Palestine, when this first happened, a News Nation reporter was arrested while covering it. So I don't want to be overly dramatic, but this is what tends to happen in other countries with authoritarianism, fascism, where, just arbitrary criminal things like domestic terrorism, journalists arrested, and corporations running the show.
Well, all of those things that we often see in other countries, authoritarian countries like Turkey and Russia, China, Hungary, we are now starting to see in real powerful ways in the United States. I mean, I'm an example, right? I'm the target of the nation's first corporate private prosecution by Chevron after I helped indigenous peoples win a big pollution judgment, And then you also see, a pipeline company, Enbridge in Canada, spending millions of dollars to pay our police, public police, to arrest indigenous protesters protesting their pipeline in Minnesota. And now you're seeing in Atlanta, corporations like Home Depot, Delta, Wells Fargo, and others spending tens of millions of dollars to privately fund a public police academy that, when it gets protested, ends up resulting in the police arresting people and charging them with terrorism, which is completely bogus and really it's an abuse of power. It's being used to try to intimidate free speech and advocacy. Between corporate power, public functions of government, as I said earlier, the very entity that's supposed to check corporate power and regulate corporate abuse, our government, has now become, for all intents and purposes, an instrument of corporate abuse. And you're seeing that now in Ohio, where the EPA, rather than really regulate Norfolk Southern Rail that caused this disaster and really force them to do testing that would really tell people whether the community is safe or not, instead is helping the company manage the political fallout. I mean, 3-4 days after the disaster, without any real testing, the head of the EPA, our governmental entity that's supposed to protect us from pollution, tells people it's safe to go back when they hadn't even done the testing. I mean, that is a government entity that is working in service of a polluter, not regulating pollution to protect the public. And we're seeing this more and more in other countries. We're seeing it more and more in the United States, and people need to connect the dots. I mean, you can look at these things like that really isn't right, it's wrong, but it's happening in so many ways in so many places now. We need to connect the dots and understand it's part of a very deep and very frightening trend in this country. And you used the word fascism, what I call the F word. I don't think it's inappropriate. Okay? These are seeds of what fascist societies have, and they exist in the United States. And if people think voting Trump out somehow got rid of them, wrong. They're still there, and there are elements in our society that keep cultivating them and making them stronger, even under a Democratic administration, particularly under this one, where we have a relatively, in my opinion, weak president who won't take on the rail company that caused this disaster.